Some absurd movie tropes are so pervasive that you almost believe they could happen in real life. That's why Adam Savage, Jamie Hyneman, and the rest of the MythBusters crew have tested dozens of movie myths over the years. Here are some of the most memorable cinematic myth busts. In the original Point Break, Keanu Reeves plummets to Earth with a gang of surfing bank robbers as the score plays melodramatically in the background and everyone in the audience sighs in satisfied happiness. Skydiving is an activity that some people do every day for reasons that remain totally unclear to the rest of us who'd rather not fall out of a plane. In Point Break, the skydiving buddies join hands as the ground rapidly approaches. They then proceed to have a conversation about how awesome the experience is. They may be shouting, but we're led to believe that they can all clearly hear and understand each other, which seems a bit fishy.
How do you like it, Johnny? Amazing!
The MythBusters thought so too, and in one episode, they decided to test this scenario by making Grant jump out of a plane. While in freefall, he was approached by a skydiving instructor who was asked to shout a specific phrase several times, but Grant was unable to understand the words. That's because in freefall, the sound of rushing air drowns out the sound of a human voice. Thus, the myth was busted. Incidentally, it also takes around 31 seconds to fall 4,000 feet, whereas in the movie, the freefall took 3 times that long, so that myth was busted as well. Maybe you didn't notice through all your salty tears, but when Jack and Rose are floating around in the ice-cold North Atlantic at the end of Titanic, there's a moment when they both could have been saved. Or at least that's what people were saying back in 2012, around the time of Titanic's 3D re-release, when someone released a bunch of photos showing all the different ways that both Jack and Rose could have fit together on that floating door. You can't ever bust a myth until you actually do it for real, though. To honor the 15th anniversary of the movie, MythBusters decided to find out if it really was possible for both Jack and Rose to survive the sinking of the unsinkable liner. Titanic director James Cameron told Adam and Jamie that the door wouldn't have been buoyant enough to support both of them, but full-scale testing seemed to prove otherwise. In fact, Adam and Jamie boosted the door's buoyancy by tying a life jacket underneath it. They were both able to climb on and stay more or less out of the water. Cameron, however, was unmoved.
The script says Jack dies. He has to die. So maybe we screwed up and the board should have been a little tiny bit smaller, but the dude's going down.
James Bond films are full of ridiculous gadgets and action sequences and improbable ideas, like Bond somehow managing to never get an STD. But most of that just gets overlooked because it's James Bond and he's awesome, and who really cares whether or not science agrees with anything he does? But some of the dumb stuff in 007's adventures really does need to be myth-busted, especially that goofy scene in Goldfinger in which Jill Masterson gets smothered in gold paint and dies. MythBusters called BS on that one, and both Adam and Jamie went under the brush to see if they could survive being covered in gold paint. Jamie seemed to have a weird blood pressure response, though doctors speculated it was probably just because his blood pressure tended to be high anyway. Meanwhile, Adam had a drop in body temperature, which may have had more to do with the fact that he was essentially naked except for the paint. But neither of them suffered any serious physical consequences. Well, maybe except for the rectal thermometer, which was certainly uncomfortable, though far from lethal. If you ever find yourself dangling from a ledge by your fingertips, that's no big deal. Just hang on for a few minutes and help will arrive soon enough. We've seen this happen often enough in the movies to know that ledge dangling is just a temporary problem. After all, Frodo Baggins could do it even when he was short one finger. It turns out we were right about one thing. Ledge dangling is only temporary, because nobody can hang on to one for as long as movies imply that we can. When the MythBusters team tested this out, they found that everyone who tried it was able to hold on to the ledge for just 1 minute, and that was only because they had about 3 inches of space to hang on to. When the space was reduced, their times were cut down to between 30 and 40 seconds, with the exception of Grant, who couldn't get a grip at all with a half-inch ledge. So unless someone happens to be standing by with a safety net or a large bucket of styrofoam peanuts, your chances of surviving a ledge dangle really aren't that encouraging. Shooting around corners is something that cool characters are known to do in certain action movies. This trope might not be as prevalent as some of the others the MythBusters have tested over the years, but what gun-toting movie hero or villain doesn't wish for a device that will let them shoot around a corner? MythBusters tested a couple of myths related to this idea. In the first, they bent the barrel of a rifle and tested it to see if the bullet would exit the barrel with actual lethal force. Surprisingly, or perhaps unsurprisingly, it did. On another episode, they tested a specific myth perpetrated by the 2008 movie Wanted, in which the characters can curve bullets just by swinging their arms. When the MythBusters tried it out, they were unable to duplicate the feat using normal humans, though it sure looked like they were all having fun trying.
Have to look at the high speed, but I'm pretty sure I curved that one.
Just to be sure, they also rigged a robotic arm to swing twice as fast as a human arm, but the bullet still left the gun in a straight line. One of the most memorable scenes in Pirates of the Caribbean: The Curse of the Black Pearl happens when Jack Sparrow and Will Turner use an upside-down rowboat as an improvised submarine. They walk underwater with the boat over their heads, and the camera cuts to them inside the boat where there's a pocket of air that lets them breathe while sneaking across the ocean floor.
This is either madness or brilliance.
It's remarkable how often those two traits coincide.
But then the MythBusters crew had to come along and ruin it all. In one episode, they tested the rowboat myth as well as a couple of others from popular pirate movies. When they tried to walk into the water with the boat over their head, they found that they weren't able to actually drag it down with them because their bodies were too buoyant. 60 pounds of pirate gear didn't weigh them down enough, nor did 500 pounds of weight on the boat itself. In the end, they figured it would take about 2,000 pounds of force to keep the boat underwater, which means there's really no way Jack and Will could have pulled this one off, no matter how mad or brilliant. Is it possible that the MythBusters could ever be wrong? Almost certainly not. They are science incarnate. They might occasionally send cannonballs through random suburban neighborhoods, but they're never wrong, not even when it comes to a galaxy far, far away. In the MythBusters Star Wars special, Adam made a Tauntaun out of foam, synthetic skin, and fur. The crew stuffed the fake carcass full of fake organs and then put a dummy with a circulatory system called Thermo Boy inside of it. They then warmed the gross duo to 99 degrees and placed them in a negative 40-degree refrigerator. Jamie and Adam reasoned that Han Solo would have needed 2.5 hours to build the shelter, and by the end of that time period, Thermo Boy's temperature had only dropped to 92 degrees. This myth was thus deemed plausible.
So, if you had access to the large thermal mass of a large animal and could get inside it, it might just save your life.
Not everyone agrees with them, though. In 2012, IO9 came to the conclusion that Luke would have been a goner inside the Tauntaun, though they used some slightly different numbers to arrive at that conclusion. Like the MythBusters, they decided on a starting body temperature of 95 degrees, since Luke was probably already in a mild state of hypothermia, but they calculated an outside temperature of negative 60 instead of negative 40. Using those numbers as a baseline, they figured that Han only had about 47 minutes to get Luke inside a real shelter. They didn't have a fake Tauntaun to try it out on, though, so we'll give the edge to the MythBusters' plausible conclusion. Indiana Jones is all kinds of awesome, especially with a bullwhip. He uses it to swing across holes in the floor of scary jungle temples, to yank a hot poker out of a Nazi's hand, and even to save his dad from falling off a tank. MythBusters did a whole episode on Indy, and they had plenty to say about bullwhips. In one segment, Adam and Jamie made a chasm out of shipping boxes and put a wooden post over the top to simulate a tree branch. When they covered the post with sandpaper, which is more similar to the bark of a tree than sanded wood is, Adam was able to cross the simulated chasm via bullwhip. The pair also tried to master hitting a small target with a bullwhip, which is evidently not as easy as Indy makes it look. They brought in a whip expert, and after that, Jamie was able to snag Adam's hand with the whip, which would have been enough to throw off his aim. Adam was then able to strike Jamie's gloved hand, which would have been enough to make an ungloved hand drop its weapon. Both myths were thus deemed plausible. Jaws is a classic of blockbuster and horror filmmaking. Any movie about the hunt for a man-eating great white shark is going to be thrilling. So did Steven Spielberg really need the climax to be an explosion? Of course he did. It's not like you could kill a giant shark with a whale-sized harpoon gun or something obvious. But could you actually blow up a scuba tank by shooting it while it's lodged inside the mouth of a very big fish?
Smile, you son of a...
This myth ended up being busted not just once, but twice. Shooting the scuba tank in the mouth of a fake shark did nothing until the crew tried shooting it with a .50 caliber sniper rifle. Even then, it didn't explode, though it was punctured as the bullet propelled down its gullet and out the tail end. So it would have been a kill shot for sure, just not the dramatic explosion shown in the movie. In Kill Bill Volume 2, the bride finds herself in a coffin. Unlike an average person, she doesn't freak out and end up dying from oxygen deprivation within a few minutes because of hysterical screaming. Instead, she keeps her cool and punches a hole in the coffin. Then she climbs out through the dirt, literally rising from the grave, thus giving hope to all humans who have ever been terrified of waking up inside a coffin. But then MythBusters had to go and snatch all that hope away. The crew built a punching robot that could generate the same force as a human punch, put the poor thing inside a pine coffin, and let it try to punch its way out. The robot punched the lid 600 times and barely cracked it. So the MythBusters then decided to see if it would be possible to dig yourself out through the dirt. They tested that out by using a coffin with a sliding trapdoor in it that allowed dirt inside. When buried 6 feet under, the coffin filled with dirt so quickly that it would have been impossible to get out before suffocating. Perhaps we should return to the practice of equipping coffins with bells on strings, just in case. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more grunge videos about your favorite stuff are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.